So this guy, his name's Brian, and Brian has a problem. He's in love with his best friend's wife, and he'll do anything to be with her, including murder his best friend. Now, Brian's best friend is this guy, Mike, and Mike is married to this woman, Denise, and they all live in Florida because, of course they do. So one day in 1997, Brian is looking at his best friend's wife, Denise, like, damn, she kinda fine. And Denise is looking at him like, yo, he kinda fine. And soon enough, the two start secretly smashing on the side behind Mike's back. And this cheating goes on for a few years. And eventually, Brian and Denise decide that this side smashing is great for them, and they want to be together permanently. Now, at this point, Denise could come clean and divorce Mike and go run away with Brian and live happily ever after, but that's not what they decide to do. Apparently, Denise is very Christian and way too religious to get a divorce. So instead, they decide they're going to murder Mike. And they come up with this insane plan to take him out to a lake and drown him. So one day in 2000, Brian invites Mike to go on a duck hunting trip. These guys often go on these duck hunting trips. So they go, and the two guys are out on this swampy lake in Mike's boat, shooting at ducks or whatever. And so they're out there, and Mike is wearing a big jacket because it's cold, and waders. And waders are rather heavy, waterproof pants. They look like this. And at one point, Brian gets Mike to stand up in the boat, and suddenly, boom, he pushes him as hard as he can over the side of the boat and into the water. Because he's hoping that the waders fill up with water, and Mike won't be able to get them off, and he'll drown in the lake, and the whole thing will look like one big accident. However, Mike is resilient, and he quickly rips off the big jacket and he pulls himself out of the waders, and he manages to grab on to a nearby tree stump sticking out of the water. And so Brian sees this and he's like, oh shit, it didn't work, he didn't drown. So he grabs his shotgun out of the boat, aims it down at Mike, and pulls the trigger. Blam! And this, unfortunately, unalives him. Then, Brian puts Mike's body in the back of his truck, and later he drives it to a different lake, and he buries him in the mud there. And now, it's Denise's turn to play her part in this. So she starts calling around to people, pretending to be worried that Mike hasn't returned from his duck hunting trip. Like, have you seen Mike? Mike is missing. And pretty quickly, police get involved, and a huge search gets underway. And they comb through the lake looking for any sign of Mike. But, of course, they don't find a body or anything other than his boat floating out on the water. And 44 days go by, and police are still looking. And ultimately, they got nothing. And so they call the search off, and everyone assumes Mike must have passed away in an unfortunate boating accident where he fell into the water with his waders on and never came back up, and that his body was probably eaten by alligators. But then, 6 months later, something unexpected happens. A local fisherman is out on the lake, and he finds Mike's waders in the water, which opens the search back up for a while. So police send divers out, and they find Mike's fishing jacket and his hunting license. But here's the first thing they notice about all these items. None of them are damaged. Like, they don't have alligator teeth marks on them. So Mike couldn't have been eaten by gators. I mean, this must have been foul play. Meanwhile, Denise is elsewhere happy. Not because they found Mike's stuff, but because she's about to collect life insurance on his death. Like, a lot of life insurance. $1.7 million, in fact. And to make it even more sinister, Brian is a life insurance salesman, and he is the one who sold Mike the policy just before he died. How f***ing evil is that? But whatever, Brian doesn't care. He got what he wanted. He's now with his friend's wife, and she is now a millionaire, and they continue on with their relationship. And 5 years later, in 2005, Brian and Denise get married. And disgustingly, they decide to live in the same house where she had lived with Mike, and it seems like their plan worked, and these guys are never gonna get caught. Until... Now we gotta talk about this woman. Her name's Cheryl. Cheryl is actually Mike's mom, and she has always thought there was something weird going on with Mike's death, and she's never accepted the theory that he was eaten by alligators. I mean, hell, police found Mike's waders and fishing jacket with no damage, so even they know this case is strange and that it was probably foul play. They just don't have enough evidence to convict anyone. And so anyway, Cheryl starts investigating on her own, and she's doing a lot. She runs advertisements in the local newspapers. She runs billboards asking if anyone has any information about Mike's disappearance. She bugs law enforcement to reopen it and look into it further. In fact, here's actually a picture of her walking around holding up signs asking people to help solve Mike's case. Here's actually another picture of her doing it too. And now eventually, because of her insistence, police do reopen the case and they look into everything again, but unfortunately, over time, they don't find any new evidence and they close it again. And poor Cheryl doesn't get the closure on her son's death that she so desperately needs. And many years pass, and it's now 2012. And poor Denise and Brian, their relationship is no longer working out. Apparently, he has some kind of sex addiction or something. I don't know. But regardless, it's no longer working out, and they separate. 3 years later, in 2015, Denise finally files for divorce. And Brian, he apparently doesn't want to get divorced, and he's super pissed off about the whole thing. I mean, after all he went through, he murdered this woman's husband for her, and she's about to divorce him? No way. He is not about to let this slide. And so late one morning, around 2:30 a.m., Brian sneaks over to her house, and he hides in the back of her SUV, and he waits. A few hours later, it's daylight out now, and she gets in and she starts driving to work. And suddenly, pow, Brian jumps over into the back seat and he pulls out a pew-pew and he points it right at her. And he starts yelling directions at her like he wants her to drive to a specific place. But unfortunately for him, Denise is stubborn. She doesn't listen and she immediately pulls over to a nearby CVS parking lot. But Brian isn't gonna stop. He orders her to call off the divorce. And she's like, yeah, sure, we can work this out. I mean, she's just saying that because she doesn't want to get shot. And so once she agrees to call off the divorce, Brian calms down and she drives him to a nearby park where he had parked his truck and she drops him off. And Brian apologizes for holding her at gunpoint while Denise agrees to get back together with him and not tell the police about this. Once he leaves, she heads right to the police station to tell the police about this. And so, bam, police go and arrest Brian. Here's his mugshot. So then, Brian is pissed off that Denise snitched on him after she said that she wouldn't, so he starts snitching on her. And boom, he suddenly admits to unaliving Mike all those years ago out on the lake. But he informs them that Denise was also involved in the plot too, and that they should go arrest her. So then, bam, police go and arrest Denise. Here's her mugshot.
A widow in Tallahassee is now charged with conspiring to murder her husband.
And so Brian takes a plea deal and he gets 20 years in prison while Denise gets life. But then she's later resentenced to 30 years in prison. And most importantly, Cheryl finally gets closure on her son's death. Good for her.